or reaching out to people in diverse fields, whether it's medicine or sort of outside. So I do a lot of work in human-centered design. I kind of connect a lot with designers, techies, kind of startups, as well as some of the academic communities. So I've spent probably the last couple of years kind of crafting an identity online, because I found that it's useful for me to reach out to people who can learn about you in sort of in a deeper way, kind of quickly, right? But also, like, I've had a lot of people reach out to me that I otherwise never would have met because they were just random people on the internet, but because we have mutual interests, like, it's led to like opportunities for speaking and for other great kind of collaborations. So I highly recommend it as someone who's kind of doing this for their professional career, whether you're a physician scientist or whether you're a professional who wants to advance your skills and kind of show what you're able to accomplish. I think it's sort of a really good way to reinforce that. I mean, I would say that the culture of academia is pretty, it like sort of stresses modesty, and modesty is important, right? Like when you go up to someone, you don't like tell them, guess what, I just published 10 papers and one of them was an XX journal, right? Like that's not the way you sort of interact in sort of the forum of your kind of academic hallway. But there's something about social media and the type of medium that it creates in terms of it being more conversational and more informal, that it really creates an opportunity to sort of bridge barriers. And I would say, like, yes, this is a little bit self-promoting, but I think it achieves the goal that I want as a professional. So as long as I'm not tweeting about myself all the time, I think it's okay. Like, I don't know that like older faculty really see this as productive, right? I mean, I have grants and I have papers and I have all those like tenure things, right? But ultimately, there's a lot of people in the sort of scholarly world who don't think that this is valuable, but I think it's incredibly valuable because we live in a networked world, and we don't live in like local huts anymore. So I don't as much use Facebook because it basically connects me to all the high school friends that I couldn't stand. So I hope they're not watching. So I just don't tend to use it. I just use Twitter. It's completely public, and I'll let Cara go into the details about how to use it. But it's a great way to just follow really interesting people. If there are science writers that do a really good job of like science communication, like follow them and just get the direct feed of like whatever they're posting, but also figure out what it is that they're interested in. And you can engage in a conversation with them because that's how Twitter is. You could tweet at Donald Trump or you could tweet at Hillary Clinton. Like that's what's kind of cool about it. It doesn't mean that they're actually going to answer back to you, but the whole concept of really just being able to reach out to someone and like say something is important. And I would definitely stress this concept of conversations, not promotion, right? So it's about interchange and it's about being in a community and sharing stuff that's of interest to others. And you know, you can once in a while tweet about what your achievement is, but it's actually more important just for cultivating relationships. So I linked to my website on my page, but it's a little bit slow, so I'll go over here, sorry. And I heavily curate this, right? And that's because I have very specific purpose in trying to sort of emphasize expertise in social media, human-centered design, and research. And so this was a process. This probably started on sabbatical in 2012, and it's evolved over the last 4 years. So it's not something that happens overnight, but it's absolutely something that you can think about kind of professionally. The other thing I would mention, whether you're promoting a study or like kind of building your professional resume, Squarespace, I love it. I mean, it's $200 a year, but it gives you like a heavily sort of like a well-designed kind of minimalist site. You can choose the format, you can choose the type. You don't have to use a web developer. You don't have to pay $20,000 for a fancy anything. Like they have great stuff. It's really beautiful design and it's relatively cheap. So I would highly recommend it whether you're trying to do a study and/or trying to have your own personal website. What were the other questions? I forgot. Throw them out again. I didn't answer them. Let's see. Now, I think one of the things that's like most intimidating about any social media is just this concept of it's totally overwhelming, right? So you have to think of it like PubMed, right? You don't read it cover to cover. You don't read every journal. You don't read every reference, right? Even if it's in your field, right? You just use it as you need it, right? And so it's a resource. It's more of a network, right, of like sort of really real-time information. But the bottom line is you don't have to be a creator like me. You can be a lurker or you can be inactive. But the whole point is like turn on the channels and start listening and start following people, and you'll learn really interesting things. And you can decide for yourself if you want to take it to another level, but you can operate at multiple levels of involvement without totally exhausting yourself and feeling like you have nothing to contribute to your career because you're on social media too much. What else can I tell you? Yeah, and then I don't know if you guys have seen this. This is like, right, social media. This kind of emphasizes like the different conversational mediums. So if you're interested in social media, get this book. It's called Jab, Jab, Right Hook. It's by Gary Vaynerchuk. He's actually, I think, he's like an entrepreneur who is basically runs a huge social media empire, but he knows a lot about social media, and he kind of describes how like the method of communication is different across all these media, right? So the way you express things in one arena is not necessarily the way you express things in another arena. So, and that's really important for tailoring to your audience. So, for example, so going back to that question about IBD, so there's like 1,000 communities. So I wanted to share this with you. So this is a website that I made. I made it like a long time ago, and it needs a little bit of updating. But you should check it out because it has like a really nice kind of short reasons or short pieces of like why Twitter can be useful or why social media can be useful. And it's just got links to things that are of interest. But the one thing I did want to share was like the bottom line is there are a ton of like social media communities online of patients, right? So I would guarantee that they're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, they have hashtags, and it's a matter of just talking to patients in the disease area that you're looking for to find them. But there's rich conversation happening, and it's just a matter of being curious and sort of being a lurker to see and understand what they're talking about, right? And I would guarantee you that, like, as someone who's in the clinic, like, if I go to a diabetes website, I can sort of see 15, 20, 100 problems that we need to sort of think about, address, and fix. Same goes with research, right? There's actually like a rich resources of ideas for possible things to study based on what patients are, talking about. So you should really use it as your intelligence, right? It's like your little spy. It's like your little fly in the room, except that it just happens to be on the internet, and it's a rich resource for information. So BCSM stands for breast cancer social media. HCSM stands for healthcare social media, so that's kind of more generic and not necessarily disease related. There's a whole online community called the Diabetes Online Community, so that's what DOC stands for. But if you're looking for topics, what you can do is you can go to the healthcare hashtag project, and it will give you can like look up a disease and it will give you hashtags, conferences, lead users in those communities who are tweeting. What happens is a lot of groups that organize like tweet chats or other conversations online, they will actually register their hashtag with Simpler, which is the organization that runs this whole website. But it's just a nice way to sort of another vehicle into finding kind of people who have specific interests. So you can look up diabetes, you can look up asthma, you can look up, IBD, right? And you'll probably find some interesting things there.
Can I ask a question related to the things you just said?
Yeah.
So one of the things I've noticed is that probably the most prominent blogger about NIH issues and grant funding is actually somebody who's anonymous. Drug Monkey is the blog, right?
Yeah.
It's just kind of interesting. I think he's sort of pseudo-anonymous. I'm sure.
Yeah. I don't know.
And I wanted to get your input on why one might choose to do such a thing. I wouldn't choose to do that, I don't think. But related, on his blog, he mentions that he felt the need to ask the IRB if he could do Twitter surveys. And as you talk about engaging with patients in some level, I began to think to myself, at what point is it different from just looking at what people are saying by going to an HTML website when you're actually sort of in some sort of interaction with them, like a Twitter survey?
Yeah, so generally I think, like particularly if you're in healthcare, I feel like transparency is really important. And so there's this article, I can find it for you guys, that basically was written by Matt DeCamp. It showed up in JAMA, and it was about basically social media and physicians, but you could extend this to like all healthcare professionals, right? And so the bottom line is that like his whole argument is that you can say this is the personal me, not the public me, but in the end, like it all goes together. Like if you went to the pool and you did something really inappropriate, like you're a doctor, and so it would still bar your reputation whether or not you said, oh no, that was the private me, not the public me, right? So, so generally the assumption is that whatever you do online, assume that your patients are going to see it, assume that your colleagues are going to see it, assume that random people on the internet are going to see it, right? So, and I assume that DroidMonkey has a specific agenda and trying to be anonymous. So I assume that like people who have more of a muckraking kind of objective for, I mean, I don't remember exactly, like I recognize the name, but there's like other purposes to being like anonymous, but generally if you're trying to sort of, my philosophy is you have to be transparent about who you are and what you're doing online.
Yeah. Right. So,
and then as far as social media, so we've tackled that a little bit, and Emily in the back has helped me with this. So, a couple things. So we are working with, so there's this really nice story about social media. So this happened in type 1 diabetes, which is my clinical specialty, but the bottom line is there's this dad who like hacked into his son's continuous glucose monitoring system to get the numbers to go to the cloud. So he like kind of created his own software now, like it comes off a device, so it's actually technically an FDA regulated device, but not really, because he's doing this for free and he's doing it do-it-yourself. But he essentially built his own tools, built his like sort of watches and mobile displays so he could get the data off the cloud, right? And then he ended up sort of distributing the code to a larger community, just open source, and there were actually a whole bunch of people in the community who started using it. And so they opened up a Facebook group that is a private Facebook group called CGM in the Cloud. They posted the link there. There's basically a website that shows individuals like basically what components you buy, how to set up your own database and do this sort of create this do-it-yourself mobile technology rig for monitoring your child with diabetes. And then it really just basically went viral. So now there's like 20,000 people in the community who are now in this community. We don't know exactly how many users there are, but it's now like the largest type 1 diabetes community in the world on Facebook. And there's people actually all over the globe who are using this do-it-yourself technology. So I'm really interested in working with this community because they're sort of the patients that I work kind of intimately with, and we're trying to do some research with the community. And so I've had some great help from Sarah Clark, who's in she's been on the IRB for like 11 years, but she's also in our sort of child health research unit, right? And so she's helped us understand like what are the different ways that you want to set up IRB to be able to work with social media, right? So this is an example of us wanting to solicit sort of ideas for research studies, but not necessarily identifying people or collecting personal data about them, right? So this was more, or it's already in the public. We just want to kind of do research or work preparatory to research to better design the research, right? So we developed this not regulated status application to be able to do that, right? And then the next sort of phase for us was, okay, we want to work with this online community, but it was really complicated because if you capture, we were trying to capture individuals in the community and we wanted to do it simple. We didn't have to want to do a consent because we knew that would be like 12 pages and then they'd all walk away. So we did it anonymous, which gave us a more expedited IRB process. And at the end we said, hey, if you're interested in more studies, give us your email. And they could choose to give it or they could choose to remain totally anonymous. So that if they gave us their email, now they're on our email list. So this is an email list that we now use to sort of do more work or engagement or future research work with this community. We have a list of about 500 people, right? So
is that unprecedented? I mean, it sounds very bespoke.
No, so this is like what the content marketers do all day, right? Like, and I would actually highly stress, so there's two things. I mean, I think people talk about Facebook and they talk about Twitter a lot. Like, one, Twitter, you'll get like, what, a quarter of the population maybe, and then the people who actually use it is probably more like 10 or 15%, right? So those aren't like the bell curve, right? Facebook is the bell curve, but then it's so big and the algorithms change all the time that it's kind of messy to use. So even like large companies that are trying to sort of brand themselves on social media, they obviously brand themselves on all of the main sites like Pinterest and Facebook and Twitter, but they don't ever sort of assume that those are the places that they're going to reach out to their constituents, because once someone changes the algorithm or like takes away some feature, their entire population could be totally decimated in terms of like electronically, right? So then they lose an entire source of sort of patients or connections, right? So most people talk about having an email list. Like it seems really archaic, but actually email lists are sort of the most direct way to get to individuals. The open rate is like 70 or 80% compared to other things that are way less. And so one thing that we sort of think about as we move forward is we think about right, trying to get a goal with whatever post you have, right? So if you're a content marketer and you want to make money, it's going to be the number of products that you want to sell, right? But if you're a researcher, it could be that like, hey, I want to share this interesting nugget with you, whether it's a social media post or a blog post or some interesting finding, and oh, by the way, follow our MailChimp, right? And then you can grow your list that way, and then you have all their emails, and then you can decide to do like campaigns and or engagement campaigns over time.
But despite the fact that that would probably be not regulated, you, I assume, would approach the IRB and allow them to tell you before you would make any invitation like that?
Well, so we'd say in the next IRB application when we actually want to do research, hey, like we're going to do this study. Oh, and by the way, we have this email. So we're going to use this email list for recruitment as well as UMHS registries as well as, right, like whatever you typically use for recruiting patients. Right. Yeah. So, does that make sense? So I think it's always helpful, like I would say like website for whatever it is you're trying to promote, you know, what's your study, your research team, your center, right? And then a MailChimp. Those are like essential tools.
Okay.
Other questions? Sorry, I don't want to go through all of this because it gets... I guess we're so quiet. All right. Yeah, so,
There you go.
yeah, so
Bingo.
you are a public XX. Whatever you are, whatever you do, you are public, right? And so my friend, Brian Berrypicking, he wrote this great book. You should download it. It's free. It's called The Public Physician. But again, I think it extends to like every other professional domain, right? In that, like you exist on the internet, and the question is, are you going to take the opportunity to craft your identity or let someone craft it for you, right? So if I look myself up on health grades, I have 5 stars from one individual. That's not me. That's not my hairstyle. Right? And they did have my age right at the time, which is kind of scary. But, right, like this stuff is popping up all over the place, right? And so, you know, there's this kind of saying that conversations cannot be controlled, they can only be joined, right? So the idea is that you should have a presence online, your center, your study, your professional identity, right? So that you're defining it rather than others defining it for you. And I mean, just to give you an example, like I've had people be like, so I blog about health and design because I just like to do that. Like it's a way for me to exercise my thoughts and sort of think about things that I want to do professionally. And like I've had people say like, oh, you know, I just like Googled health and design and then your webpage came up. And then they're like, can we talk? So it's like, so you do get SEO from crafting an identity, so it's actually really important. Because what do you do? Like anything that you do, even as healthcare professionals, what's the first thing we do? We always Google. You always Google people that you're about to meet. You always Google people that you don't know. You always Google your doctor, right? So, how are we with time? We're getting close, right?
Mm-hmm. Do like 5 minutes?
Yeah, okay. So, wanted to show you some, I think, successful examples of professional identity. And like over time, you have to decide what flavor is right for you. So for example, Wendy Sue Swanson, she's Seattle Mama Doc, she blogs, she's a pediatrician who blogs for Seattle Children's Hospital and sort of blogs at the intersection of being a mom, but then also being a pediatrician, right? So she creates videos that sort of explain anticipatory guidance topics that she would typically have in the clinic, but then it's this idea that her patients can see them before they go, and then when they come to clinic, they've heard all that, they've heard the spiel, they have 15 minutes, they can actually ask her a more in-depth question that applies to their child, right? So that's one way to think about it, like clinically. So I'm trying to think about sort of research-wise how this might work, right? But if you're trying to work with the patient population and they need to come in for study visits, like what's the extent that you can sort of create the environment to prepare them for what to expect when they come to see you or come to see you in the clinic or the clinic research unit, right? And I think the other thing that's, I think, really important, especially for trying to reach out to patients, is to really work with patients as collaborators and as individuals. Like, how much more inviting is it to have a patient talk about what they did and what their experience was than to have some doctor talking about it, right? So I'm very supportive and like very fanatic about participatory design of kind of recruitment materials, but as well kind of the whole research enterprise. So she, so like she's awesome, but I'm not like her. Like I can't film videos of myself and put them online, right? And my purpose is different because I really want to reach out to sort of a health design crowd, and she's really reaching out to a very clinical audience, right? Mike Evans, like you've seen his videos, 23 and a half hours, I think has, I don't know, a bajillion million views. But he does a lot of whiteboarding to do basically sort of education about health. He does all sorts of interesting things. He's in Toronto. Aaron Carroll is a blogger, right? So he writes for the Citizen Economist, and he's like a pediatrician like me who happens to have interest in health policy, started blogging because of his blog. He now writes for the New York Times Upshot, right? And so like, I think there's very great opportunities to get sort of your message heard when you just decide to put it on sort of a place that you don't think anyone's going to read it, but over time it can sort of allow you to make connections that lead to greater opportunities. Other last questions? Like, there's so many slides, but I don't think that's like the most productive use of your time.
I think sometimes people wonder how you tweet constantly throughout the day, so maybe talk about scheduling.
Yeah, so I give the veneer of tweeting all the time, but you gotta go. So you should check out. So go to my Twitter super user guide, and I'll tweet it again with HCSM so you can see it. But like I use a lot of tools. So Buffer is one of them, and basically what you can do is you can install it as an app. And so say you're like reading a really interesting article in the New York Times because you're trying not to write your grant. And you're like, oh, wow, there's like this really interesting article. Sorry, the internet here is like really slow. What's kind of cool about it is that you can, so let's go to an article. Right, so do you see this little extension here? It's just like a Chrome extension. So what you can do, so say I wanted to tweet like a sentence that I thought was really interesting and tweetable. I might highlight it. Yes, it's just really slow. Goodness, they gotta get the web better up here. Okay. Oh my gosh, this is like so slow. Oh my gosh, because of the eyeglass ad.
What is the name of the extension?
Buffer, B-U-F-F-E-R. Okay. No, I don't want that. Okay, so you highlight what you want, right? And then you hit that, right? And then it takes the quote, it adds the link, and then usually there's pictures attached. So you can be like, oh, I want to add the picture because now people will see it. And then you hit add to queue, and then you basically can set up inside Buffer like a system that'll just like peel off tweets all the time. And you can set like the time, and like, you should definitely do like, I think they say like on the hour or just before the hour as people are switching meetings, right? And then it's like early in the morning, lunch, kind of dinner time, evening, and then like weekends, like I do social media for Gen Pediatrics, and like weekends are like much more engagement than the rest of the week because people are busy during the week. But it's just a good way to sort of, you can basically load up all of your content and it'll just fly for you, right? So that sort of gives you efficiency in your process. Other questions? Yeah.
So it sounds like Twitter is your preferred or your main. I've heard more and more that Twitter may be losing some momentum, or some people are starting to leave Twitter. Do you see a different social media outlet that's picking up steam, or is it still worth investing?
I don't. Well, so
in Twitter?
yeah, I mean, like on the venture capital market, I guess they're taking because they're not growing exponentially. So people are talking about how it's going to get sold or something like that. But I don't know. I mean, I've like developed a lot of relationships that I value. So like, I like it. Like, there's really interesting people online, and so I do it. A lot of the kids, I guess, are doing Snapchat now, and then a lot of like the media brands are trying to pick up on that. So even like the New York Times is doing Snapchat, but like I haven't really gotten into it. And I guess you can save your snaps, but then they go after like 24 hours. So there's always going to be a new medium, right? There's Instagram, there's Snapchat, there's going to be another one soon, right? But I still find value in it. I mean, I've been on for like 3 or 4 years, so it's taken some time, and like I have maybe like 9,000 followers, so it's taken me time to get to that, but it's been a really good investment for me. But again, it's sort of like you have to have whatever web page you control contain a lot of information about you. Plus, you can always have links to your social media or the next social media channel that you're going to crush or the next one, right? So like you still want to have a place where people can find you even if social media totally forgets about you or erases you.
That's what Kelly's going to talk about.
Yeah.
So one question we had at the last event was, as this outreach, as people become expected to do it, how this sort of plays into the promotion and tenure process?
Yeah, so I think the promotion and tenure process needs a reboost, right? Because if you put this on, they would like laugh you out of the park, right? But what I would say is it indirectly helps, right? So just as you get introductions to faculty members, which lead to interesting connections and possible like speaking gigs, like the same thing happens online with specific individuals. So I wouldn't flout it. I don't flout it to any of, well, my senior people have been very nice to me, but like, you know, I kind of got into it at the point where I already was like promoted, so it made it a little bit easier. So, I mean, for the younger junior faculty, I'd say like make sure you have your curated, crafted identity online. My guarantee is that your boss doesn't even know about it. But it's definitely not something that you go like, I guess, putting on your resume unless it's like, you know, like I do social media for Gen Pediatrics. I'm a social media editor, so it's like, oh, okay, that's okay, right? Because it's like for a peer-reviewed journal that people care about. But I think there's a big evolution that needs to happen inside academia. And I think with like alt metrics and things like that, like I do think that that's changing, but I think what's interesting is that like if you have a presence and you connect with the right people, your work might be just as good as that other person's who did a similar study, but people remember you because you're online and other people don't remember that person, right? So it's this, so like they basically said, there's a study about I think like blogging economists, and like the ones who were bloggers, even though their quality of their work was similar, they got like 10 times as many citations. So just because of the fact that we are all consumers of social media, notoriety still kind of holds high because they'll reach out to you before they reach the next person if you're the first person that comes to their mind because you happen to be in the channels more, right? So it's indirect, but it's a really valuable form of networking. I can send you like links and like all sorts of resources,
Okay.
So.
Yeah, we'll have the screen recording, so all the
Okay.
websites you went to, you'll be able to
Alright,
view. Yeah, I thank you so much.
Oh yeah.
Hello everybody. My name is Kelly Davenport. I'm a project manager with Michigan Multimedia. We're a web development team inside the medical school. We came out of MSIS, Medical School IT, and you may know that the IT orgs within the health system and the med school recently combined forces, so we're now called Health Information Technology and Services. So I build websites for the medical school and a little bit in the health system on the clinical side, but mostly on the academic side. So this is me. I say on my website I like to make things with words because websites are really made out of words. And so even though most of my current job is around web design and information architecture, which is sort of the structuring of information to be findable and usable online, my background's actually as a journalist. So this was a kind of a really nice dovetail topic for me to come and talk to you guys about, and one that I don't get to talk about that much. Okay, so I kind of want to approach the topic of writing for the web to bring in some of my background in user experience design. Is anyone familiar with that term already? I know Dr. Lee actually already touched on the idea of user-centered design. Some people have kind of heard that topic mentioned before. So as I mentioned, I kind of am sitting at this intersection between journalism as well as technology. And user experience design and information architecture has to do with sort of how do we make these online places out of information really useful to people. Many of us spend hours and hours a day navigating these spaces, and I have some stats in here that talk about just how much time people are spending online. It's been going up every year. And I put this slide in here because as I was going through my notes, I realized I was saying the word grok a lot, and I don't know if we have any science fiction fans. Yeah, thanks, Anne. I think this is a word that comes to my mind because I think it's sort of the philosophy of how I tend to approach my work. Wanting to help people understand something intuitively. And to do that, we need the empathy for the person that's coming to us. So I'm not a clinician or physician like some of you are, but I'm sure that probably resonates with you as well. Okay, so a couple of things I want to talk about today because I know we don't have a lot of time. I wanted to go over some fundamentals and just give you a little bit of background information of what I know about what's true about writing on the web and what's successful. And include some kind of concepts from information science that I think might be a useful frame. And then look at some examples, and if we have time, do a little activity. Okay, so this kind of came up already today, but user experience can be defined as someone's entire interaction with your institution. And I think it's easy to forget that that includes your words, because so many of the ways that people initially come to us, whether it's to our clinics, to information about training programs that we're offering, is through online information. And so that kind of is the front door now to so many of the services or institutions that we all are part of. And the other thing that I think is kind of embedded in the idea of user experience is that there's this agency on the part of the user. They have some task in mind. They have some goal or some problem that they're trying to solve. It's not just sort of this nebulous person who is kind of interested in just reading whatever you put out there. So I would say our job is to help them solve that problem or answer that question as easily as possible. Okay, so I'm going to argue that the web then is different, especially when we're thinking about writing. What are some of the different online spaces that you guys spend a lot of time in, just in your daily life? Different websites or publications?
New York Times.
New York Times. Okay, I'm a fan. Digital subscriber, yes. Anything else? Twitter. Good. Online banking, online shopping, probably all of the above. Amazon.
NIH.
NIH, yeah, all of the University of Michigan, many websites. The phrase that I like, that I kind of stole from Dan Klein, who's an information architect. He works for the Understanding Group, which has an office here in Ann Arbor, and he teaches at the School of Information where I did my master's degree. He says websites are places made of information. I actually have the words information architect on my LinkedIn profile, and every once in a while an actual architect will look at my profile and they're probably kind of confused. It's like, well, not that kind of architect. But the reason that this resonates for me is because websites are a combination of design and content to create the structure that helps us find our way. So we're not just reading, we're also kind of wayfinding through these digital places. So thinking about someone's experience when they come to the online information that we're providing has to do with sort of how are we supporting helping them find their way. Okay, so I went and looked recently. This is from the first quarter of this year Nielsen report. And they're finding that on average Americans are spending 10 hours and 39 minutes a day consuming media. So this is up an hour from last year. And that hour a day increase is due to increased smartphone and tablet usage, which I think is interesting. And I think the key word here is consuming media, because when we look at the way that people read online, it's not the way that they read in print. And I found some kind of little statistics on that to share, but it gets back to that concept of helping support some type of task or need. And so it's not about necessarily consuming a narrative, but about getting something done. So we find that people are more likely to scan online. They might be trying to find their way to a particular piece of information. And that word that I included there in the middle, berrypicking, is actually from an information science concept around the study of information-seeking behavior, I think is the niche field. So there's this idea that it's a non-linear process to look for information online because each step of the way is giving you feedback on where you want to go next. And so the kind of model when you sketch it out is the idea of someone kind of hunting around for that sweetest, juiciest berry that kind of fits in mind of what they're looking for. And I think that's kind of a useful concept to keep in mind because it's easy when we're writing to think that all the words are really important and that we're looking at, especially from our framework and our kind of domain knowledge, instead of thinking about it from the framework of, well, what is this information helping somebody accomplish once we publish it online? And especially, does it help them accomplish it if they only read 1/3 of the information that we published? Okay, so this graphic is from an eye-tracking study. So there's actually at least a couple of labs on campus that have this equipment. This is done in user experience research to look at how do people's eyes move on the page when they're consuming information, either in a web app or through a website. And so consistently they find what is known as this F-shaped reading pattern. So people are not reading end-to-end lines the way that you would potentially in a book. And it tends to follow the same pattern across different types of websites. So you can kind of see underlying there. There's like an industrial site, there's a Google search results page, and it looks like an e-commerce page in the middle. And what this heat map shows of the results is the areas that are red are sort of more attention. And then where it gets blue is sort of dropping off, so it's cooler. Okay, so the joke that you could say is, well, how do people read on the web? And the answer is, well, they kind of don't. Some folks have found, about 28% of people, 28% of words on a page are actually read. So 79% of people always scanned any new page. So 30% didn't. And that F-shaped reading pattern kind of shows up a lot, no matter what the information is. So I'm wondering, does any of this surprise you guys? Does this resonate with your experience, or?
Seeing more navigation on the left side to follow that F pattern.
Yeah. I guess go ahead.
No, I guess I would say it depends on what it is I'm reading. If I go to a place to read an article, I'm actually reading an article. But if I'm trying to search for information, I'm reading a different way.
Mhm.
And if I'm on social media, I'm doing a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there are articles where I'm specifically, like even the New York Times,
Mhm.
I will sit and read the entire article.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. So the format really matters.
or a science book, or
Yeah. Yeah.
What does the heat map look like of a paper book being read?
That's a good question. I don't have an example of that. Yeah, I'd have to look it up to see if.
It sounds like they're assuming that you read every word, and I'm not sure that that's true.
Yeah, no, I don't think they're trying to say that it's that you would read necessarily every word in print, but that there is a different way that your eyes track across the page on a screen versus in print. So I think that's what that's meant to demonstrate. Yeah. Yeah, I do, there's some great stuff that I linked to here, and these will be posted online later that goes into more detail, and I think they probably talk a little bit more about the comparison. The Nielsen-Norman Group, they're a big user experience research firm, and they do studies like this all the time and publish their results for free, so it's kind of interesting to see what they're looking at.
Yeah, it would be interesting
Yeah.
to show next.
Yeah, and I didn't put it in here, but there was a recent article about reading styles on a Kindle, which is like maybe the closest digital approximation to a book. It has the page turning, like skeuomorph effect, and it's like the screen doesn't have the backlit glare as much, but they still found differences in the way that, and they thought it was partly because the embodied experience of holding a book you actually retain more because it's the physical connection to the object as well as the information intake. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Any other comments on this? Okay, so those were just a few kind of general frameworks that I thought were interesting, and then I wanted to touch on some best practices and leave time maybe to do that little short activity. Okay, so some reader-friendly writing techniques. I think these are probably medium agnostic, but are especially important online because of that sense that people are not reading as much of the content that we put out. Direct, concise, and specific phrasing. Active voice, so subject, verb, object construction. I see a lot of academic writing where you really front load clause after clause after clause, and then you can't find the verb. At that point, it's like, whew, I'm out. And one that is really near and dear to my heart that I have a couple of examples of to help illustrate is structure that kind of conveys the intent of the information. So it's not all just paragraphs, maybe, that it's a narrative article, but there may be some type of structure inherent to the information itself that we want to help convey in the way that we lay out the page on our website. So one other technique that I think could be adapted to be thought about in terms of writing for the web that is a concept that comes from software development is called progressive disclosure. And so if you haven't heard this word before, and once I explain it, you'll start seeing it everywhere. Progressive disclosure refers to kind of prioritizing in a interface the most important or most used tasks, and then kind of hiding down one level those extra activities that you can do. So you'll see this in your online banking website, any type of shopping cart experience. This screenshot is from Gmail, where you have to click on the little format icon to get the kitchen sink format toolbar that comes up. So I think this is interesting to think about in terms of writing, especially if some of you are doing writing for audiences across sort of a spectrum of literacy, a spectrum of domain knowledge, where you may want the top level of your website, sort of the root level pages of your site to be more accessible to a lay audience, but you may want to have more detailed domain-specific kind of technical information down a level that you just linked to. So thinking about in terms of like, well, what is the most important information to the broadest audience that might be coming to read about my work at the top level, and then how do I make it clear where you can jump and dive down to get more information without overwhelming people right away. Because I'm a former newspaper reporter, I have to include one of the staples of journalism, the inverted pyramid, an oldie but a goodie. This again, I think a lot of technical communication and academic writing would really benefit from going back to the basics of who, what, when, where, why, and how. And I would also add, who cares? So I'm sure you guys have all already seen this before, but I had to include it. So one of the things I was wondering about when I was putting this together is, is there any work done to understand different approaches to writing for the web for people of different literacies? So what I found, at least a couple of articles, was that these sorts of best practices really support people of all different literacy levels, whether it's technical domain experts or maybe people who don't have as much of the background in that area, or even have a lower literacy level altogether. Because what they found is that those types of best practices that can help move you through the information in a really concise and consumable way actually reduces the cognitive load on both parties. And so even if you're a highly literate person who's reading a ton all day, when you're just trying to get something done, the ease, kind of easily facilitating that is beneficial to you as well. Now, I think the tension maybe for some of you is, again, how do I talk to perhaps more of a peer audience if the information I'm talking about is of a more scientific or technical nature? So we can talk about that because I'm actually interested in what you guys have been working on so far. Okay, so one last little bit about that structure idea. So even once we get the fundamentals right at the sentence level for our writing, I think it's important to then look at kind of that consumption piece. How is this information going to be used online? Are we supporting a specific type of person, a specific type of task? Maybe it's a sequence of steps that we need someone to do. And so these are 4 examples of common structural patterns that you might see in writing that's presented online. Sequence or timeline. Maybe it's organized around a very specific target audience. Maybe it's a Q&A format, or maybe it's sort of helping you complete some type of task. Are there any others that you can think of that you see a lot? Okay, we'll have a few examples we can take a look at. Okay. So this is some text that I pulled off of a website. This is information for people who are going to become a naturalized US citizen. And I think this text has a lot to recommend it. The sentences are short, the paragraphs are short, so we don't feel overwhelmed by sort of a wall of words. We can easily scan through and find sort of an entry point in the text if we have a keyword in mind that we're trying to solve a problem, like, what do I need to know about blah? Is there some type of checklist? Or like, what documents do I need? You might be looking for the word documents or checklist or something like that, application. And so by really front loading those keywords in each sentence, it makes it much easier to scan to kind of find the entry point that fits the task you're trying to complete. I think the piece that's missing here is that structural piece. So fair disclosure, I took this text and kind of unformatted it, but I'll show you what it actually looks like on the website, because they did a nice job. So this is how it appears on the physical web page. And immediately we see, oh, this is really a to-do list. These are the things I need to do, and it's numbers. That means I probably need to do them in order. So again, that structure is supporting the use of the content. The other thing that they've done is break out each sub-step into bullet points. So I don't have to read through a paragraph and think, oh, did I miss a step because I read over one sentence? Now, because it's visually delineated, I can easily see, did I do all the things that I needed to do in each step? So I thought that they did a really nice job on this one. This is a website produced by the US government. May surprise you. But okay, so here's one more example. This is the footer links for Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Their entire website is really structured around specific audiences because they have, like us, many audiences that they're trying to communicate with in one place. So they have organized their main kind of menu links and entry links for their website around specific target audiences. So I can easily see, you know, if I'm a parent or if I'm an adult patient, or maybe I'm a referring physician, maybe I'm a prospective PhD. There is a home for me right here in these links because I can easily see where I belong and kind of dive into the section that's relevant to me without trying to wade through information that's not relevant. Okay, so recapping. Front load key information. Use short sentences and bullet points. Subheadings are really useful in helping people, again, find that entry point that's relevant to them, and also a subheading helps sum up what that next section is going to be about. So I can choose, do I need to read that section or not if I'm in a hurry? Choose a structure that reflects your intent and how that information is going to be used. And then, of course, useful writing, guidelines for any type of writing, verbs. Avoiding acronyms and jargon, unless the acronym or jargon is really part of like the in-group speak of the people that you're communicating with, which it may be the case. And being really specific and concise. Okay, so with the last few minutes that we have, I want to talk about audience, because for any of the clients who come to me and say, hey, we want to work with your team to develop a new website, the first question that we almost always ask is, oh, well, who's your audience? Who are you really trying to communicate with? What is it that you're offering them, and what are they looking for? So kind of we're looking for that overlap between that user need and that communication need, and how do those two things come together? So I haven't got a chance to ask you, but what are some of the groups of people that you're wanting to communicate with your online writing? Yeah.
So through our center, we have that multiple audience thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have to reach the lay public, physicians, and scientists.
Mm-hmm.
So we do we do have a structure where you can go to a tab for scientists, for
Mm-hmm.
physicians, for patients,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a little tab for giving, and then we have a utility bar on the bottom for quick links to multiple different.
Yeah, wonderful.
And it's also for internally for people in our own.
Yeah, and I think that audience kind of driven organization underscores how much we expect web content to kind of speak to us personally. Many web pages for consumer websites or health web information websites are written in the second person, so you, meaning me, the reader. And one little interesting fact that I found about that I kind of had a hunch, but I didn't know for sure, is that found that that convention started with very early software, where the software would have requested a prompt from you, you would type it in, and then it would, so you were really having a conversation with that software program. And I thought it was interesting how that convention has really seeped into the way that we write online as well, in a much more kind of personal way, especially for information that's sort of helping an individual support a task, or apply for a training program, or sign up to be in a clinical study, something like that. Any other thoughts on audiences that you're working with? Yeah.
So something that I encounter working with different PIs and coordinator is that they typically want a piece that can do it all.
Yep.
And that it speaks to all audiences, it doesn't matter who it's going to be. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit towards that. I know it's not really the focus of your talk, but it's great when you have a website to divide it, but when it's specifically about a particular emotion of whatever just happened, that's something that I have to navigate, and I don't really know how to do that.
Yeah, so one question that because I encounter that a lot too, especially with websites, and you say, well, who is it for? And the answer is, well, everybody. And it's like, well, literally everybody on planet Earth. Really? So one question that can be helpful is asking about outcomes. So as a result of reading this information, what is the next step we want someone to take? And so that's going to help zero in on, well, what is the real communication intent of this information? Is it purely informational? Occasionally there are going to be cases where there's kind of generic, purely informational content. Your about page, here's a center, we're super awesome, here's the stuff that we do, the end. And that is kind of for everybody. But especially with the conventions that we know around the kind of individualized information that people expect online, having that tailored approach is going to be more effective because people will immediately know that you're talking to them and you get where they're coming from, so you have more credibility. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. What time do I need to?
You're doing good.
I'm good? Okay.
Yeah.
I have probably 5 more minutes.
Yeah.
So this is another activity that actually could probably help with your question as well. And this is done for websites, for web applications. This is a technique that's used in user experience design to create what's known as a user persona. Have you guys seen anything like these before? Okay. So this is usually done to synthesize actual interviews with your users or your kind of target audience, where you're understanding what it is that they need, what's kind of their frame of reference for understanding your information or what it is your application does. Sort of if you have an existing application or website, like what are the problems that they have with it to capture that. And then it's sort of anonymized into a little story about these different demographic groups that make up your audience. These are a really nice touch point for a design team, and the way that we use them is to kind of keep that user front of mind when we're making decisions. Because it's really easy once you get down the road of developing a piece of software to say, well, this works. Well, does it work for this person in this case? Or same with our content. We may be writing a page about a specific health condition. Have we thought about the frame of mind that the person is going to be in who's coming to read that? And is the tone of that information going to match up with the context in which it's going to be consumed? Is that person going to be really emotionally upset, having just received a new cancer diagnosis? And does that information take that into account in the way that we've written it? So those are some ways, again, where that bringing back that empathy helps us connect with creating better communications. And it also kind of gets back to your question around prioritization. Many of us, because we've been in this big academic institution, are trying to talk to a lot of different kinds of people. And sometimes we have to make choices about, well, who is the first most important audience? If we need to prioritize the way that we're going to phrase something, what level of detail we're going to include, and we think some people may not understand this technical detail, well, maybe it's because that audience is secondarily important to us. So maybe the technical audience is more important in that case, or maybe vice versa, and we need to make it more understandable. So the handout that I gave you, and you can always just take this with you if you don't have any thoughts today, but is supposed to support kind of this idea of mapping out a basic content strategy for these audiences that you're wanting to talk to. So I always start with the user needs. What does this user care about? What are they trying to learn or accomplish? And I think pretty importantly and easy to forget, what's their current level of understanding? A lot of web writing that I see that's not successful is almost in that sort of dictionary Wikipedia mode, where it's sort of just devoid of all context of who's actually going to be reading it. And for a dictionary, that's useful, but for other information, not so much. Content strategy, so this is sort of the part that you, the creator, are bringing in. What's the most important information for this user? What format of content would best support them? And what level of detail will help them understand? So one example that I did was for a project here at the med school. So I worked with the Office of Faculty Affairs, which processes new faculty hires and the promotions process for medical school faculty to update their website and completely overhaul the way they were presenting and structuring their information. Their previous website consisted mostly of PDF versions of kind of manuals around that process, which really made sense from an institutional point of view, in that they probably had someone who was in charge of updating that manual, had a table of contents, and they knew what page everything was on, and there you go. On the web, what that meant was that if you had a quick question you wanted to look up the answer to, what's the policy around maternity leave for postdocs? you could not look up that information easily without scanning through a very long PDF document. So we broke out all that information, and then we thought about it more from this kind of audience perspective. So the template I gave you is based on one that I just kind of made up for this project, which was what do medical school faculty need? And this was based off of the synthesis of interviews with faculty in different parts of their career trajectory that I interviewed. So under the understanding task, up here at the top, there was a desire on the part of the school to kind of help new faculty understand what did it mean to be part of the medical school. So there was a desire to have a little bit of that kind of medical school brand information present on their website, culture and things like that. A big part of what they needed to do on the website was really to plan for promotion. What did they need to be thinking about a few years in advance? What were the kind of materials they needed to put together? That sort of thing. And then there was smaller kind of step-by-step things that maybe they needed to do around different processing of paperwork or policies they needed to look up, things like that. So those were the kind of high-level tasks that we identified. And then what I did is I used this to brainstorm, well, what content would support that task? And so some of the things that we developed are on the site here, but were outlined here before they existed. We created timelines to show what the promotion process would look like, what are the major milestones. There's a database of these different professional development resources that's searchable. So those are just, that's like one format that you may or may not find useful. So if you wanted to take a couple of minutes and jot down some of your ideas based on these types of prompts, so thinking about, okay, well, who is it at the very top? Who's my user? What are the primary tasks that I want to support with my information? And then what information might map to that task in support of both what I want to communicate and what they want to learn. So I know we only have a few minutes, so I don't know if anyone has any thoughts they would like to share or just any open questions before I kind of wrap up for now. There's a lot of stuff I didn't get a chance to talk about. Content, of course, has lots of other facets, maintenance, content creation, working with subject matter experts, SEO, a lot of things like that I didn't have time to touch on, but I'll take any questions that you have or any thoughts about what you came up with. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks, guys.